introduce our next speaker, and that is Mr. Tom Hoefling. Let's give him a round of applause. He is running for President of the United States of America. So it's not often you get a presidential candidate as one of your speakers, but that's pretty awesome. He is an abolitionist presidential candidate. He's a national conservative political activist, a writer, publisher, organizer, and consultant. He is known primarily for his efforts to abolish abortion and his staunch defense of traditional marriage. He has also been a longtime advocate for the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, private property rights, economic liberty, fundamental tax freedom, secure borders, and the maintenance of American sovereignty and security. He was closely associated politically for many years with the former Reagan administration official and UN Ambassador Dr. Alan Keyes. He actually came with Dr. Alan Keyes in like 2008 at this very place, and I was actually working here at Bracken Christian School when they came, and so I guess I forgot about that. But anyways, he's also the primary author of the Equal Protection for Posterity Resolution, which is a revolutionizing how Americans look at what must be done to stop the abortion holocaust. Him and his wife Sienna live in Iowa. I've never been to Iowa. I'm gonna have to visit sometime. Once in the fall this time? Anytime. Okay. There you go. Where they're raising 7 young children. So you can go to his website, tomhoefling2020.com. Please welcome Tom Hoefling.
All right, I'm going to do good by you, Daryl. I have notes, so we're good. Before I get into my remarks, I just want to make a couple comments. Between Daryl's remarks and Andy's remarks, someone like me, they've been feeding me this stuff for a couple hours here, and I have so much that I would love to respond to. And the one thing I wanted to reinforce what Daryl said. He was talking about Hitler, okay? And the lesser of two evils ideology, which is rampant in our country today. Frankly, Christians in this country, pro-lifers, have become utilitarians. The greatest good from the greatest evil. That is the definition of utilitarianism. It was put together by a guy named Jeremy Bentham. He was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson, who hated the Declaration of Independence. He cooked up utilitarianism, and this whole lesser of two evils thing that we hear throughout our politics now, that's where it came from. And our people in this country are sadly inculcated. But you were talking about Hitler. People don't remember. He was the product of a lesser of three evils election in 1932 in Germany. And he didn't win the election. In fact, it was Paul von Hindenburg who won this lesser of three evils election. Because there was Hitler, and there was a communist, and there was Hindenburg. Okay, why do I say Hindenburg was evil? Well, maybe he'd been okay, the Weimar Republic, and maybe he'd been okay, but he was old, and he was senile, and he was not fit for power. So they elected Hindenburg, and what happened? Not long after that, things got a little dicey. He appointed Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany. And within months, they'd had the Reichstag fire, and Hitler had taken power, never to relinquish it until he put a bullet in his own head, frankly. So that's what happens. And don't forget what Germany was. Germany was a Christian, a Protestant nation, by and large. There were a lot of Catholics, don't get me wrong. But it was, really the home of the Reformation. Okay? They were an advanced country, not unlike us, technologically. Socially, they were very advanced, and look what happened to them. And they got there by going down the same path that we're on now. And I just wanted to point that out to reinforce what he said. Thank you, Andy. Thank you for running with me. I've run a couple times now. This is the third time in a row that I've run. And Andy has done, I couldn't be happier with my choice of Andy. Andy here in Texas has been among the most faithful people that we've dealt with across the country for the last dozen years since we got this group of people together. And I hope you'll get to know Andy better and work with him here in Texas, because I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. First of all, I'd like to thank Daryl and everybody else for inviting me down here. I love this area. I love San Antonio. I first came here, I was doing the math about 36 years ago. It was the first time I ever visited San Antonio. I don't know how many ring roads they've added since then. I'm sure there's a few. But I loved it. I loved the atmosphere. I loved this area way back then. As he pointed out, well, when Andy and I were driving down from Arlington, I drove down from Iowa, and then we rode together from Arlington. I'm saying, I know I've been at that school before. I just know it. And we pulled in the lane out here, and I thought, I know I've been there. And sure enough, as soon as we walked in the door, Daryl confirmed, I was here in this room 12 years ago with Dr. Alan Keyes. This was just before we left the Republican Party. So it's a bit of our personal history. We were not satisfied with John McCain. This was a man who had spent his entire political career in the back rooms of the Senate fighting everything we believed in. So,
almost up.
okay. So we decided, and this was before we started America's Party, that, I'll get to that in a minute. We decided that we were not going to stick with the GOP. There was no way that we or the people we represented were going to support John McCain. But we were still trying to get Alan through the Republican primaries. The Republican Party was disadvantaging us in every way. They didn't count our votes in Iowa. It's a long story, which has been followed in subsequent elections by lots of other really bad stories about what has happened in the Republican Party. But anyway, we decided, well, they haven't anointed John McCain yet. We'll just go to Texas for 6 weeks. Me and Alan, we came down here and we went everywhere in Texas. I had spent a lot of time down here previously in my personal life, going back 36 years, but also politically. I'd helped run congressional campaigns and things in Texas before, so I kind of knew the political lay of the land. And anyway, we ended up here in this room, and I knew it. I just knew it when I saw it. So I'm happy to be back here. So I want to introduce you to somebody here. This young man, his name is Ezra Robert Hoefling. He is my youngest son. Okay, I have currently 10 living children. I have 4 grandchildren. Okay? He's the only visual. I put him up there so you could all feel good for the rest of my remarks tonight. Just look at that face. You have to feel good looking at the vitality of that young man who is now 2, by the way. This was about a year ago or a little more. But I have him up there because he's the primary reason I'm here. Him and his brothers and his sisters, and I have also 4 grandchildren so far. And I'll tell you, he's the reason I'm here. In the civic sense, I'm here because I'm fighting for my children and my grandchildren and my posterity. And so that's the basis for my remarks tonight. It's why I do politics, whether it's in Texas when I have the opportunity and across the country. This is it. This is why we are fighting to try and save America right here. This is our future. Now, the title of my talk tonight, and Daryl will vouch for me, we changed this in the middle because of a whole bunch of circumstances that came about, but I decided to title it The Doctrine of the Greater Magistrate. So he had doctrines earlier, now I have doctrines for you. So you're getting lots of doctrines tonight. But most of you who are abolitionists understand that this title is a play. It's a play on words. And it's a takeoff on Matt Truhella's book. It's a fine book called The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. And this is permeated throughout abolitionism across the country. This book's gotten a lot of good play. You need to understand, I'm not here in any way to contradict his book. I'm not here to disparage that book in any way, okay? That's not what this is about. It's an excellent book as far as it goes. It's absolutely clear that the lesser magistrates, which that doctrine that he teaches in that book, are going to have to answer to God eventually for what they do and don't do in fulfillment of their own oaths that they make to God. Those lesser magistrates are vital. They're vital. we're not going to win this from the top down. We're going to win this from the bottom up.
Yes, sir.
But it's also clear that we aren't going to stop this Holocaust without something else, besides just the lesser magistrates. And that's what I want to get to tonight. But it's not a question of either or. I hope I can establish this right up front for everybody to truly understand. It's not either or. It's not free the states and there is no federal government. That's not right. We live in a federal system. We live under a constitution in which there's divided sovereignty. Our Constitution gives some of the characteristics of sovereignty to the states, and it gives some of the characteristics of sovereignty to the federal government, which some abolitionists would call the federal beast, okay? Which it has become. But it's not either or. It's a question of all of the above. We have to fight on every front if we're going to win this battle and stop the destruction of God from coming on our country that is going to come. If we don't stop these abominations, if we don't stop the shedding of innocent blood in our country, read your Bible, study history. Okay? No nation that has shed the blood of innocence has survived. We can't. God would have to apologize to Sodom otherwise. Okay? So let me read you. When I use a dictionary, I tend to pull up my 1828 Webster.
There you go.
You know, we're homeschoolers. My wife, Sienna, is a second generation homeschooler, in fact. I've been involved in starting Christian schools a couple times, been involved in all of this. We like to use the 1828 Websters because it's less corrupting. So I'm going to read what it says, most of what it says for magistrate. It's a noun. A public civil officer invested with the executive government of some branch of it. In this sense, a king is the highest or first magistrate, as is the President of the United States. But the word is more particularly applied to subordinate officers as governors, intendants, prefects, mayors, justices of the peace, and the like. So that's what a magistrate is. Now, Matt's book, the very title tells you it's called The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. So you can infer from that if there's lesser magistrates, there's got to be greater magistrates, right? Just follows. In fact, if you look at a copy of this book, and many of you I'm sure have a copy, on the front it's got a picture of the English nobility forcing the King of England at the point of a sword to sign the Magna Carta. Okay? So that's what is depicted on the cover of the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. Now, don't get me wrong, the Magna Carta was a fine thing for its time, as far as it went. Okay? It was a good start. Many of us in this country, if you trace your family tree, many of us, a large percent of us, you'd be shocked, can trace their ancestry actually to some of the nobles that were actually the ones holding the sword to the king's throat. That document is critically important in the long history of liberty in the West, particularly the English-speaking West. Magna Carta is very important. But if you study the history of it, all it really did was to force some concessions, okay? The recognition of some privileges out of the king, okay? And it should be noted primarily to benefit the nobility, okay? Not the people, but the nobility. It wasn't a declaration of the universal rights of man or anything similar to that. It wasn't the Declaration of Independence. It was just the nobles saying, King, we're going to kill you if you don't, grant us some concessions and grant us some privileges. Now, jumping hundreds of years forward towards our day, our American system, which came much later, was vastly superior. Okay? It was a vast improvement on Magna Carta. In this country, the people are considered to be the king. Okay? Or the sovereign, under the sovereign Almighty God. This was what the founders of this country believed. We, the people, are the sovereign in this country. That is the basis of the American system. Okay? We don't have to go begging for our rights from a king. Because we recognize in America that our rights come from God, not from any man. We understand that our rights are intrinsic to our very nature as human beings, as human persons made in the image and likeness of God. And because of that, we understand that our rights precede and supersede all man-made constitutions and laws. So even if we didn't have a Bill of Rights, even if we didn't have a constitution in this country, guess what? We still have God-given unalienable rights. And what's the supreme right, folks? Life. Without the right to life, you got nothing. All your other rights are gone if your life is taken from you. These 60+ million little babies that have been destroyed since 1973, and before that actually, in this country, all their rights are erased. When they kill these children, they're not just destroying that one child, as bad as that is, as wicked as that is. They're destroying an entire bloodline into the future. They are destroying posterity. Okay, and I'm going to get to that, how important that is. They're destroying posterity, and they're destroying the very basis for our form of government in this country, which I'm going to cover. Okay? These rights exist whether we have a constitution or not. Why? Because God said so. He said so. God said so. When he commanded, do not murder and do not steal. This infers that we have a right not to be murdered and we have a right not to be stolen from. Okay? And that's the bold assertion of natural right that's in our Declaration of Independence. And that's what it means when it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Our forefathers overthrew the King of England as our sovereign because, among many other things, in a long train of abuses and usurpations, he obstructed the administration of justice. Okay? He declared war on the people, but he also declared the people out of his protection. You see? So, he was guilty of a deadly form of malfeasance. In other words, he declared war on the people. Okay? But he was also guilty of what we would call nonfeasance. In other words, he declared them, the people of America, outside of his protection. Who in America in the last 47 years have we declared as our government, the Supreme Court, the executive branch, the legislative branch, all of 50 states, who have they declared outside their protection? Who? Babies. Tens of millions. And God only knows how big the number actually is. Okay? And this was one of these failures by the King of England were among the charges that were listed in the Declaration of Independence against King George III. And they said that he has abdicated government here. It's an abdication. We didn't really have a revolution in effect. We had a counter-revolution. We had an unjust king in a parliament that were trampling all over our God-given rights. Samuel Adams and others who argued against the English, they tried for years, James Otis and others, to argue with the British in terms of British law, okay? And it got nowhere. They were just mocked and ridiculed. So finally, Samuel Adams and others, they stopped arguing that way. And they simply began to argue on the basis of natural law, the natural rights of the people. And you go read, the work of the committees of correspondence to the city of Boston and all of these works. Their main invocation is the God-given unalienable rights of the people and their right to protect those things. So everything changed. So they made no king but Jesus into their battle cry. Amen. That's what they did. They put self-evident truth, objective truth, the moral law on the throne, and decided that instead of being ruled over by a king or by courts or by traditions or precedents, they were instead going to be governed by the moral law, what our founders in the Declaration called the laws of nature and nature's God, and by a written constitution. See, the British, they talk about the British Constitution. It doesn't exist. And they say, well, we have an unwritten constitution. No, what you have is the arbitrary will of rulers, including judges. That's what people love to talk about, how great the common law is. Well, yes and no. I mean, there is a common heritage in the English-speaking world of truth and, liberty and all of these things. There's an element of that. But overall, we rejected the British system when we set up a republic based on a written constitution. Now, the scripture, and I'm going to bring the scripture into this, and I'll come back and talk about the Constitution. The scripture talks a lot about judges and magistrates. Jesus, in his earthly ministry, talked a lot about judges and magistrates himself, which shouldn't surprise anybody, considering the fact he was the original author of human government in the first place. Who thought up human government? God did. Okay? We see the genesis of human government if we go read Genesis chapter 9, okay? And that was after the flood, right? The Lord commanded two things, basically, which is number one, be fruitful and multiply. Kind of bears on the subject we're talking about tonight, right? The Lord commanded us, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, okay? It's a command. He gave it to all of the nations through the sons of Noah in Genesis chapter 9. But he also said that if any man sheds innocent blood, by man must his blood be shed. Okay? This is where God commanded the body of the people as a whole, right, to punish evildoers who shed innocent blood. It wasn't optional. It's never been amended. It's never been thrown out. This was the command to all of the nations on this earth through our descendants, or our forebears, who were the sons of Noah. Okay? This command has never been changed. So those who say, well, you're pro-life, or whatever they call you, but you support capital punishment. Well, I support capital punishment because God commanded it for murder. And guess what? Capital punishment is in support of innocent human life, intrinsically, and it's the basis for just human government. It's the very basis. So, he gave us human government and the representatives of the whole body of the people, i.e. the representatives of the whole body of the people, the legitimate authority to will disorder the community. Okay? In pursuit of what? Justice. That's the basis of just human government. Why does it exist? Why does every decent human government exist? It's justice. What does justice mean? It's not some big legal word. It just means right and wrong. What's just? My little children know the difference between right and wrong, and they know it from an earliest age. I'm going to just go off the track a little bit and relate a little anecdote. A number of years ago, some of my children, who were a lot smaller then, their mom was trying to settle them down and put them to bed, and you know how that kind of goes, and they were talking back and forth, and you can tell kind of what election this was during, but one of the little ones said, Mom, why don't we support Barack Obama? And she thought for a second, she goes, well, he supports killing the babies. These were little children, okay? Like 2 years old and up. Not much of them. And then another one said, well, why don't we support Mitt Romney? And she said, well, he supports killing some of the babies. And at the time, Sam, I think he was like 4 at the time, he piped up and said, we shouldn't kill any of the babies. Okay? And then Sebastian, who was like 6, I think, something like that, he said, give me all the babies, I'll take care of the babies. Okay? Little children know what justice is. They know what's right and wrong. Look, little children know it's wrong to kill a baby. They know it's wrong for a man to claim to marry another man. Okay? They know it's wrong for a woman to claim to marry another woman. Okay? They know this. They know that every little kid is supposed to have a mommy and daddy. They know it because they understand justice. We've overcomplicated it, and we've let the lawyers begin to define things. Now, there are several important passages in the New Testament that elaborate on these things. Most famously, the well-known passage in Romans chapter 13. Okay? Now, there are some Christians today, and even abolitionists, I am sorry to say, even in our own ranks, who seem to kind of hold Romans 13 in contempt, okay? In reaction to those who are in this ditch over here, teaching falsely that we must do whatever the government says, okay, no matter what, they've swerved clear into the other ditch over here that completely abandons the clearly stated scriptural imperatives for civil government. So they've gone out of one ditch, they've gone into another ditch. Both are wrong. Both are wrong. If we must obey unjust edicts from magistrates just because they're magistrates, the prophet Daniel was wrong when he refused to stop praying and ended up in a lion's den. You know, like Daryl put up here. You know, Daniel was wrong if we were supposed to just obey the king, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were wrong when they refused to bow down to the king's golden image and ended up in, where? In a fire with Jesus. Okay? The apostles were wrong, apparently, when they said we must obey God and not men, and kept right on preaching the gospel, even though there were those telling them to stop. So, let it be fully understood here tonight, folks, okay? Not for one moment do I suggest that we should bow to illicit or unjust government or governors. I'm not saying that, okay? What I'm telling you is that we have a scriptural moral duty to conform ourselves in our actions to just government, okay? That is about the business of doing what God created it to do. This is not optional if we want to be obedient to the Lord and be fruitful and effective for the Lord in our civic life. We don't have any choice. We have to conform ourselves to the real law. That's, as citizens, that is what we're instructed to do. So let me read this in Romans 13, the famous passage, with that clear understanding established. Romans 13:1, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. He's a magistrate. He's a minister. That's what a magistrate is. And that's what our founders, our forebears, thought government was supposed to be. These people in office, they're not our sovereign. They're not our king. Donald Trump is not my king. Okay? Jesus is my king. Okay? But he is a minister, and he's a minister of God's. Donald Trump is in that office. I may not like it, but he is. Okay? He's the chief magistrate of the United States currently. I have to respect that to some degree. Now, do I have to go along with him when he says, I'm honored to be the most pro-homosexual candidate or president in American history? Do I have to go along with that? Do I have to sit here and say, oh, it's okay, he's the president, he's the magistrate? No, I don't. My job as a Christian is to say, that's an abomination, that's wrong. Okay, when he says it's okay to kill those babies, no, I'm not going to go along with that. Okay? So, magistrates are appointed by God to execute wrath on him who practices evil, according to Romans 13. Therefore, you must be subject, it says, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. Now, there's another little passage that people seem to miss. It's in 1 Peter chapter 2. And actually, all of 1 Peter chapter 2, the first 12 verses or so, it's talking about how Christians were supposed to have a mature understanding as Christians. And it talks a lot about who we really are in Christ and what we really enjoy in Christ. But it also talks about how we're supposed to act. Among other things, we're instructed to put aside all malice. That's badness, anything bad. We're supposed to put that aside. Deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking. We're told, in fact, that we are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people. Okay, so we're something in Christ far more than America can be or ever will be. And we've now obtained mercy, it says. And he begs us as sojourners and pilgrims, which is what we are in America today. We're sojourning here, we're pilgrims, and we're supposed to abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having their conduct honorable among the Gentiles. And when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. So we're supposed to be setting a good example, just to sum it up. As Christians, we're supposed to be living a Christian life that people can look at and say, you know, that's what a Christian does. Then in verses 13 through 16, Peter, brings in the civil aspect of that mature Christian walk and shows us what it looks like. It says in verse 13, therefore, all that stuff in the first 12 verses, therefore, okay, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king and supreme or the governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice. Kind of leaves out a lot of libertarianism, I have to say that. But as bondservants of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Okay? So, I repeat, in America, the whole body of the people are considered to be the king or sovereign. The governors, in that verse, would be everyone that we would call a magistrate. It would include our lesser magistrates at the local level, but it would also include our greater magistrates, which would include the state governors and the chief magistrate of the United States, which is the president himself. Now, why would I call the governors and the president greater magistrates? Well, it isn't because they are necessarily so great as individual human beings. We've got a lot of bad presidents in our history, lots. Okay? I would argue that there were several that were really good Christians. I would vote for Calvin Coolidge in a flat minute, okay? But, no, it's that they have all the authorities and responsibilities that correspond, right? The governors have the authority and the responsibilities that correspond just to their state. The President of the United States has jurisdiction and responsibilities that run to the entire country, including all of our states and also our territories. So they have a greater and wider authority. The state governor is responsible only for his jurisdiction, which is his state. The president is responsible for everything, or all of it. The whole e pluribus unum. You know, out of the many, we have one. Okay, we have a federal government. We have a federal system under our Constitution. And the president is the chief executive. He's the chief magistrate. He's the commander-in-chief. People need to get this across. And part of the reason I'm bringing this out, I'll just be right out front with y'all, okay? There have been those who have challenged me because I have made the assertion for the last 3 elections that if I was elected president of the United States, I would walk into office and I would use the power of the United States to shut down the abortion clinics. Okay? I made this clear assertion in the simplest terms. And that's what I would do. Why? Because it's self-evident that these are persons, and our Constitution requires that every person in every state be protected. So I'm kind of responding to some of the criticism because I've had, and this has happened in the past, I've had people say, well, you'd be a tyrant if you did that. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Tyranny's over here.
Wait a minute. And I'll get to that, okay? I just can't buy that. It's not tyranny to stop a Holocaust. It's not tyranny to stop a genocide. It's a tyranny to let it continue, to be like King George, to declare war on these babies, but also to declare them out of protection. That's tyranny, not protecting them. That's not tyranny. So, the stark truth is that in this current day and age that we live in, the President of the United States has more raw power, frankly, than any other human being on this planet. Okay? No one else commands a military that approaches ours in terms of brute firepower. Now, don't get me wrong, God could cancel all that out in 2 seconds. Okay? But the fact is, the President of the United States is the most powerful man in the world in our day. Okay? Fact is, Richard Nixon, when Roe v. Wade came down in 1973, from the very beginning, and every president who has held that office since Nixon, They had the power and the authority to refuse to enforce Roe. It wasn't a law. Roe was not a law. It was a court opinion. It was an unjust, illicit, unconstitutional court opinion and nothing else. Daryl was kind enough to mention one of our websites, equalprotectionforposterity.com. Go there, click on the judicial supremacy link and get an education on what this fallacy, this destructive fallacy of judicial supremacy has done to our constitutional republic. It's a coup d'etat. They've turned our country, and we're seeing another set of hearings for another Supreme Court judge who does nothing but sit up there and say, I believe in judicial precedent. That's what I'm committed to. That's what I'm responsible to do, is to enforce stare decisis. Okay? No. The oath of office is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And few people know this, but judges are required to take a second oath to administer justice and also to treat people with equity, equality. In other words, not to show favoritism to anybody. So they violated their oath in every way. The opinion is meaningless. But the only reason that it's being enforced is because the executives, the chief magistrate in the United States, has enforced it with the cooperation of both political parties, both, in this phony two-party system, which our founders never wanted. They continue to do it. And it's all being cooperated in by the Republicans and the Democrats and the U.S. Senate, the Congress, the state legislatures. This judicial, our law schools are permeated with this false notion that we live in a judicial oligarchy. We do not. And Christians need to stop saying things like abortion is legal, so blah, blah, blah. No. Abortion is not legal in the United States. People, get it through your heads, okay? It cannot be. And it's for all the reasons, because our whole system is based on the natural moral law. That's the ground that our system is built on. The Declaration of Independence is the chief cornerstone of our whole system, and it asserts the rights of the people. The preamble, which I'm going to get to in a minute, which is the statement of purpose of our Constitution. Abortion violates every single clause. It destroys every single clause of the stated purposes of our Constitution. So Nixon could have enforced it. Ford could have enforced it. Carter could have enforced it. Ronald Reagan, as great as he was, he was on to some of these things. He talked about the 14th Amendment right of the unborn child to live. Okay? He talked about their personhood. He talked about those things, but sadly, he didn't get all the way there. He didn't have a party cooperating. He didn't have the people, the Christians in this country, forcing him to go the rest of the way and stop supporting bad judges, appointing bad judges like Sandra Day O'Connor, and frankly, Antonin Scalia. Most Christians in this country, if you ask 99% of them, they'll tell you Scalia was awesome. He was the best judge we've ever had. No. He said, no, they're not persons. And the only people that are protected by our Constitution are what he called walking around persons. He was no good. And we have a judge now being put into the role who's idolizing Scalia. And she's saying the same things that he said, that I have to go by judicial precedent, and that's what I'm obligated to do. So, the fact is, and I'll use an analogy here, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, from the very beginning, all they had to do is, click the heels of their ruby slippers together and say, there's nothing like equal protection under the law. There's nothing like equal protection under the law for all. There's nothing like equal protection under the law for all. They've had the power to fix this from the beginning, and they haven't. And why haven't they? Because most Christians don't even understand a tiny part of what I'm standing up here telling you tonight. They just don't get it. Nobody's told them. And even abolitionists aren't getting everything that I'm telling you tonight. They've got to get it. If we're going to turn this around, if we're going to get the church to stop compromising with evil, okay, abolitionists got to get it. They got to get all of these basics. Not just the moral basis for abolitionism, but the constitutional basis as well. We have every argument on our side. Scientific, moral, constitutional, legal, every argument that you can possibly conceive that is any decent argument, we have on our side.
Amen.
So I'm going to read what Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federal 78. He said, and of course Hamilton was very important in the ratification of the Constitution. He was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers. He said, whoever attentively considers the different departments of power must perceive that in a government which they are separated from each other, the judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous to the political rights of the Constitution because it will be least in a capacity to annoy or injure them. And you read that and you go, oh, they were wrong. No, they weren't. Hamilton was right because of what follows. He says, the executive not only dispenses the honors, but holds the sword of the community. Who exercises in the United States that power that was granted in Genesis 9 by God? Primarily in our country, it's the president.
The executive.
Yeah, the chief executive. The legislature not only commands the purse, but prescribes the rules by which the duties and rights of every citizen are to be regulated. The judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over either the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or of the wealth of the society, and can take no active resolution whatsoever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will. And in the original, force and will are capitalized. I mean, he really wanted to drive. The courts do not have any force. They have no will that is legitimate of their own, okay? But merely judgment, and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. Okay, so nothing can happen, and I mean, well, we've had presidents who told the Supreme Court, you and whose army? We have had, at least one, okay? He may not be the most savory character in our history, but, it has happened. So, in Luke 12:48, we're told by Jesus that for everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more. I mean, do you understand how that applies to what we're talking about tonight? The President of the United States has a greater responsibility than anybody else to stop this Holocaust. Any other individual. Again, don't get me wrong, it's not just the President's duty. It's the duty of all of us. It's the duty of all of we the people, all of us. It's the duty of the lesser magistrates. It's the duty of our state legislators, of the governors. Okay, it's the duty of the Congress. It's the duty of the courts. But it's also the duty of the President of the United States. The President is charged by our Constitution to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Okay, that charge is unique to his high office. He is, more than anybody else, responsible for making sure to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. What is the law in America? It's this: no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. That's the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. Has any one of these tens of millions of little babies gotten a fair trial on a capital offense and been convicted? Okay? They're violating the Fifth Amendment. The President of the United States is responsible for enforcing the Fifth Amendment, okay? He, more than anybody else, is responsible for that. And I'll jump to the 14th Amendment, which some conservatives love to hate on, but the 14th Amendment reinforces our abolitionist position as good as anything ever could. And it's perfectly in line with God's commands when it comes to the protection of innocent life. And I'm going to shorten it up so there's a few dots in this, but no state shall deprive any person of life without due process of law, nor deny to any person within his jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Okay, are unborn babies persons or not? Are they? Are they human beings? Of course they are. Are they protected by our Constitution? Of course they are. That's what Roe is about. Even Blackmun himself, in Roe, plainly said that if they're a person, of course they're protected. He used the words, of course, quote unquote. Of course they're protected. Even Blackmun admitted it in Roe. They just dehumanized, depersonified the child in the womb And we see the rivers of blood that have flowed because of that. But the president has the power. Okay, he has the raw power. There could be no question. He has the power to shut down these murder factories people call abortion clinics. He could do it exactly the same way that Eisenhower used the 101st Airborne to shut down Arkansas Governor Faubus back in the 1950s. When that governor was using the National Guard and a mob, the force of a mob, to keep 9 black children from going to school. So it's not even a question. The president, look, when Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne into Arkansas, it was over, people. It was over. There was another incident in Colorado, striking miners. The state was using the National Guard to kill people, including women and children. And the president sent troops into Colorado, and it was over. Okay? It stopped. The murder of innocents stopped. So he has the power. We know he's the most powerful man on earth. So he has the raw power. So that's not really the question, right? The question, and this goes to some of the critics that I've had, okay? The real question is, does he have the appropriate authority, okay? And the sworn duty to do so? And that's what I'm trying to get to. Yes, he has the power. Of course, he has the authority. If there were terrorists killing classrooms full of children in various states every day, would the President of the United States have the proper authority to send, and oh, by the way, the governors and the state legislatures weren't doing anything about it, right? Would the president have the appropriate authority to send the troops in there and put a stop to these acts of terrorism that were killing thousands of little children? Of course he would. You'd have to be a fool to reply to that in the negative. So I'm going to be here tomorrow night too, okay? I hope you can stand that. But, you know, in this talk tonight and tomorrow, I intend to remove any doubts from anybody's mind, if I possibly can, that he has the power, has the authority, and has the duty to do this. Now, so does everybody else. Our Constitution requires all officers, Article 6, all officers of government in this country and all the branches and at every level have to swear an oath. It's required. A solemn, sacred oath to support and defend our Constitution, including its equal protection requirements. It's not optional. The duty rests on all, as well as the president. You know, is the president going to go, if, let's say a miracle happened and they elected me, okay? Could I go there and do it by myself? No. I would have to have those who are also in the executive branch working under me, who also thought it was self-evident that little babies are human beings in person, and they would have to act, and we would also need governors to step up and finally begin to do their duty under the 14th Amendment as states. We would need that. Eventually, we would need the courts. We need to make impeachment and removal of judges normal.
Yeah.
Like, we got a judge that's out of control. He's claiming powers that the Constitution doesn't give him. He's declaring that we have to enforce abominations by, you're gone, you're out of here. By next week, we'll have another judge. Okay? And then he messes up, rinse, repeat. That's what we need to be doing. Short of that, what do? It's what abolitionists have been saying now for years all over this country, and that's ignore Roe. Ignore it. It's not a law, just ignore it. And go about the business of providing equal protection. Now, I'm going to talk, and now I'll wrap up here, about Alexander Hamilton. Again, I'm going to bring him up. In Federalist 84, he talks about the preamble. And if you study back, Hamilton and then Benjamin Franklin was involved in this as well. They didn't want a Bill of Rights. Madison did not want a Bill of Rights. And Madison was very clear about it. He said it was because he didn't want anybody to get the idea that somehow because we have this Bill of Rights, the government was granting rights to the people like under the Magna Carta. So no, they didn't, when they ratified the Constitution, they did not have a Bill of Rights, right? But the Anti-Federalists were agitating politically for a Bill of Rights, and they won the political fight, and directly after the ratification of the Constitution, then Madison said, okay, I'll help you write a Bill of Rights, but you have to include the Ninth Amendment. Does anybody know what the Ninth Amendment says? It's the most neglected amendment to our Constitution. It basically, in shorthand, says, just because the people's rights are not listed in this Constitution, that doesn't mean they don't retain them. Okay? It didn't help. It didn't help. But anyway, all Hamilton wanted was the preamble. And he said the preamble was enough. And not only that, he wanted a shortened version of the preamble. And we have the various clauses. Okay, and I'll read the whole preamble for you. It's not very long, it's one paragraph. We, the people of the United States, the sovereign, right? The sovereign in this country, we, the people of the United States, we're the ones who wrote this document. It's our Constitution. It doesn't belong to the lawyers. It doesn't belong to the politicians. It's ours. We, the people of the United States. In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Abortion destroys every clause. Okay? You cannot form a more perfect union when you are going about the business of destroying the most fundamental union that exists on earth, which is the bond between the child and their mother. Okay? You are destroying our union when you support abortion. You can't establish justice. There's nothing more unjust than slaughtering a little baby. There's nothing you can do physically that's worse than killing somebody, okay? Ensure domestic tranquility. We have a nation now that is full of violence. Why? Because we have allowed violence against tens of millions of babies to take place. And that's why it's breaking out all over people. Don't kid yourself. Okay? Provide for the common defense. That's the defense of everybody. That's what common defense means. It's not, oh, we're going to protect Rusty and his family, but we're not going to protect those babies. No, it's the common defense. Our government exists to protect all. Promote the general welfare. That doesn't mean, that has nothing to do with individuals getting a welfare check. The general welfare is the well-being of all, the whole body of the people. Abortion destroys the general welfare, destroys it, it's gone. And look, words have meanings. The word posterity means something, okay? It's and I'll have people, especially lawyers, okay? I'm a ninth grade dropout, folks. Okay, I was a street kid when I was 15. I was on the streets down in Omaha, up in Omaha, okay? And, I argue with PhDs who have law degrees from Harvard. I'll argue with them, I don't care, they're wrong. If they're judicial supremacists, they're just wrong, and they're destroying our country. They'll tell me, well, the Declaration of Independence isn't the law. And the preamble isn't the law. And I say, well, only if you think the ground and the foundation are not part of the building. Okay? If you think you can build a building without the ground the building stands on and the foundation that it sits on, you're insane. Okay? You can't do that. So this is the law. This is the stated purpose of our Constitution. Hamilton thought this was all we need, except he didn't even think we needed all those clauses. In Federalist 84, he used his shorthand version. He said, we, the people of the United States, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. He thought all he needed was to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That's what he thought. He says, and this is him, he says, here is a better recognition of popular rights than volumes of those aphorisms which make the principal figure in several of our state Bill of Rights, and which would sound better in a treatise of ethics than the Constitution of government. So he thought, this is all we need. And it would include everything that you would find in the Bill of Rights, but it wouldn't infer then that we were getting our rights somehow from government, because our rights come from God. So the preamble is the law, and it's of equal or greater weight to the Bill of Rights, according to the people who wrote the Constitution. So I'm going to read you the preamble again, except I'm going to kind of give you the Alexander Hamilton version. He said, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union to ourselves and our posterity, okay? in order to establish justice to ourselves and our posterity, in order to ensure domestic tranquility to ourselves and our posterity, in order to provide for the common defense to ourselves and our posterity, in order to promote the general welfare to ourselves and our posterity, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. So, my brilliant wife came up with this formulation that I just read to you. She's the smartest person I know, okay? And that brings into high relief how important the preamble is and how much abortion violates every single clause and in fact destroys them. So, the law in America is no person shall be deprived of life without due process of law. No state shall deprive any person of life without due process of law. It's not optional for the states. You know, we've had libertarians and Ron Paul and some others in the past who have posited what I would call a pro-choice for states position. It was in fact posited right after Roe by Gerald Ford. It was devised by his political hacks in order to get around having to do anything. They said, well, we'll send it back to the states. Okay, no. I just read you the law, the supreme law of the land. The states are absolutely required to provide equal protection. It's not optional. Quit acting like it's optional. Now, the Constitution article in Article 4, Section 4, it also says the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. So, the President of the United States is specifically required to guarantee that the states act according to their republican form of government. Is a judicial oligarchy a republican form of government? Is it? No. The President of the United States has an obligation to make sure we're not a judicial oligarchy. Okay? And he also has a duty to check and balance anybody who's trying to enforce a judicial oligarchy upon us. Would it be tyranny, as some have claimed, for the president to stop the Holocaust, to put a stop to tyranny? Let me give you a quick, again, I'll go back to the 1828 Webster's. I'll give you the definition of tyranny. Arbitrary or despotic exercise of power. The exercise of power over subjects and others with a rigor not authorized by law or justice, or not requisite for the purposes of government. Hence, tyranny is often synonymous with cruelty and oppression. Is there anything more cruel and oppressive than murdering tens of millions of babies? I ask you. Unresisted and cruel power, absolute monarchy, cruelly administered, severity, rigor, and clemency. So, look, we don't need any further laws in order to provide equal protection in this country. Many of us have fought for state legislation that would fix our state laws and our statute books. I did in Iowa, as Andy, 7 years ago. We tried. We've tried in, I don't know how many states now we've had bills, about a dozen or so, I imagine. Only one has gotten a hearing here in Texas. Of course, the pro-life Republicans killed it before it could even get out of the gate. Texas, as Andy mentioned, needs to clean up its code. It needs a bill of abolition, and it needs to go completely through the code and throw out every code section that ends with, and then you can kill the baby, as Andy said. Okay? All of those things, and by the way, we did that in our state code in Iowa, and all of those sections that licensed killing babies, that gave governmental permission to kill babies, guess who they were put there by? It wasn't the Democrats. It wasn't the pro-abortion Democrats. It was the pro-life Republicans. In fact, I've had pro-life, affiliates of National Right to Life have murder in their eyes when I was standing behind a podium like this. When I pointed these things out to them, I thought they were going to come up here and, shoot me. You could see the hate in their eyes because, in a sense, in a human sense, you kind of understand it because these people, by the way, God has opened the door. On Tuesday night, I'm going on Ask Dr. Brown's nationally syndicated radio show to debate Janet Folger. She was Janet Folger. She's now Janet Porter. She married, her married name was Porter. She's the author of the heartbeat bills. They've passed these in, I don't know how many states, at least a dozen. The courts have struck down 10 of them in 10 states. The door is open. I didn't think in a million years she would debate me, but she has agreed to do that. But she's one of those who has put these code sections in our statute codes, and there's some in the federal code book as well that license governmental permission to kill babies. This is why, look, I don't oppose these regulatory bills necessarily because they're incremental, okay? That's not it. It's that they're immoral. It's not because they're incremental. You could, theoretically, as Andy pointed out, the Texas bill didn't actually scrub everything out of the state code that I would like. So in a sense, and I know some people will get really mad at me and saying this, in some ways that was an incremental bill. But guess what? It was moral. And that's why I drove 1,000 miles to come support it. That's why all of our people across the country supported it, because it was moral, even though it didn't quite finish the job. So we have a lot of work to do to clean up our state codes, our statute books. Like Andy mentioned, in Texas, you've got a constitutional problem. The 14th Amendment says all persons. You have to protect all persons. The Texas Constitution says citizens. So theoretically, it would be constitutional in terms of the state constitution in Texas to kill illegal immigrants, or enslave them, or rob them. That wouldn't be unconstitutional because they use the word citizens. The 14th Amendment makes a clear distinction between the privileges and immunities of citizens and the rights of all persons within each state jurisdiction. Go read it. Separate out those clauses. It's very important that people understand this. So you've got that work to do. You need to amend the Texas Constitution. Now, having said all that, we got all this stuff in the books. We got a faulty. All the other state constitutions that I know of say persons and not citizens. This is a problem that's unique to Texas. So our Constitution already protects everybody, or it's supposed to. The state constitutions, all but Texas, are supposed to as well. Yet, even with all that bad language in place, guess what? The Constitution of the United States is supreme in this country. All of the officers of government, including every officer of government in Texas, is sworn to support and defend the Constitution, which clearly requires equal protection for all. Frederick Douglass. As far as I'm concerned, one of our greatest, very greatest presidents. I wish. One of our greatest Americans, right up there. If I had to pick top 3 greatest Americans of all time, Frederick Douglass would be one of the 3. And if you were to ask me who was the greatest slavery abolitionist, it's not even close. I would say Frederick Douglass, even though there were some other great men and women. But here, I'm going to read you a couple things from Frederick Douglass, and then I will wrap up. He said, "What then is the Constitution? I will tell you. It has no vague, indefinite, floating, unsubstantial, ideal something, colored according to any man's fancy. Now a weasel, now a whale, and now nothing. On the contrary, it's a plainly written document, not in Hebrew or Greek, but in English, beginning with a preamble, filled out with articles, sections, provisions, and clauses, defining the rights, powers, and duties to be secured, claimed, and exercised under its authority. It is not even like the British Constitution, which is made up of enactments of Parliament, decisions of courts, and the established usages of the government. The American Constitution is a written instrument, full and complete in itself. No court in America, no Congress, no president can add a single word thereto or take a single word therefrom. It is a great national enactment done by the people and can only be altered, amended, or added to by the people." Frederick Douglass said this over in Scotland because he was persona non grata in this country, but they would listen to him in the United Kingdom. So he was in Glasgow, and that was in March of 1860. And I'm going to read you a little more. He said, "I repeat, the paper itself, and only the paper itself, with its own plainly written purposes, is the Constitution." He said that in Glasgow as well. He also said, "I would unite with anybody to do right, and with nobody to do wrong." Little side note for my abolitionist friends who are watching. You've got some people out there who may not be exactly like you, theologically, whatever, but if a Samaritan wants to help the guy bleeding in the ditch, am I going to reject him in terms of helping seek justice and seek healing for that victim? No. Not everybody who could be willing, could be made willing. If we tell the truth and we tell it strong enough and we tell it powerful enough, there are a multitude of people in this country. I've had Democrats, lifelong Democrats, respond favorably to what I'm saying and go, you're right, you're right. Okay? So not everybody's going to be just like you. So I think I'll skip that one. It's long. The Constitution, and this again is Frederick Douglass, the Constitution says we the people. The language is we the people. Not we the white people. Not we the citizens. Not we the privileged class. Not we the high. Not we the low. Not we of English extraction. Not we of French or Scotch extraction. But we the people. Not we the horses, sheep, and swine, and wheelbarrows. But we the human inhabitants. And unless you deny that Negroes are people, and I'll revise that for a moment, unless you deny that unborn children are people, they are included within the purposes of this government. And he said, the Supreme Court of the United States is not the only power in this world. It is very great, but the Supreme Court of the Almighty is greater. Judge Taney can do many things. Judge Blackmun can do many things, but he cannot perform impossibilities. He cannot bail out the ocean, annihilate the firm old earth, or pluck the silvery star of liberty from our northern sky. He may decide and decide again, but he cannot reverse the decision of the Most High. He cannot change the essential nature of things, making evil good and good evil. Happily for the whole human family, their rights have been defined, declared, and decided in a court higher than the Supreme Court. Frederick Douglass. And he said, I hold it is our duty to remain inside this union. That might not make me popular with some secessionists in Texas, but Frederick Douglass said we need to remain inside this union and use all the power to restore the enslaved millions of precious and God-given rights. I'll repeat it and substitute for the enslaved. I'll say, I hold it is our duty to remain inside this union and use all the power to restore the unborn their precious and God-given rights, starting with their supreme right, the right to life. All I ask of the American people, Frederick Douglass said, is that they live up to the Constitution, adopt its principles, imbibe its spirit, and enforce its provisions. That's all he was asking. That's all I'm asking, folks. Okay? He also said, what ought to be done can be done. Think about that. What ought to be done can be done. There's a multitude of people that I interact with and have for the last 3 elections who told me, you're right, Tom. Of course you're right. Okay, I know they're bad. But, and then all the stuff that Darrell talked about. Okay? If it ought to be done, it can be done. But it's going to require Christians to stop compromising with evil. Nothing is going to happen. This country cannot be saved until a large enough mass of Christians. There's still 70-75% of the American people still claim to be Christians. Okay? We could argue all night long about how much of that is real, how many are the true remnant of God. Only God knows. I don't know. But I know that if even 1/3 of those who call themselves Christians would go out and vote for me and Andy, go write in our name, we're on enough ballots to win, theoretically, or we're available to write in, like here in Texas. We could win. It's a mathematical certainty if the Christians would stop compromising with evil and stop supporting what they themselves admit to me constantly is wrong. Cotton Mather, who lived in the late 1600s, early 1700s, he was one of the foremost preachers that this country ever produced. He was like the guy during that time period. He said, the ability to do good imposes an obligation to do it. Don't tell me you can't do this, people. Don't tell me that. You can. And guess what? Because you can't do it, you have an obligation to do it. It's not optional. And I'm going to read one of my favorite quotes here in the whole world. This was written back, I'm not even sure. I think it was in the 18th century. Or no, yeah, it was 1774. A man named Nathaniel Niles wrote this. He said, if any should say It is vain for them as individuals to be vigilant, zealous, and firm in pursuing any measures for the security of our rights, unless all would unite. I would reply, ages are composed of seconds, the earth of sands, and the sea of drops. Too small to be seen by the naked eye. The smallest particles have their influence. Such is our state that each individual has a proportion of influence on some neighbor at least, he on another, and so on, as in a river. The following drop urges that which is before, and everyone through the whole length of the stream has like influence. We know not what individuals may do. We are not at liberty to lie dormant until we can at once influence the whole. People tell me, well, you can't win. Well, how can I ever win as long as you're supporting what you even admit is evil? How can you do that? How could I win? Of course, they don't realize I'm not the problem. They are. They're the obstruction. They're the ones standing in the way of us saving this country and stopping this Holocaust. We must begin with the weight we have. Should the little springs neglect to flow till a general agreement should take place, the torrent that now bears down all before it would never be formed. These mighty floods have their rise in single drops from the rocks, which, uniting, creep along until they meet with another combination so small that it might be absorbed by the traveler's foot. These unite, proceed, and enlarge until mountains tremble at their sound. Let us receive instruction from the streams, and without discouragement, pursue a laudable plan. Nathaniel Miles, June 5th, 1774. And I'll go back to Frederick Douglass. He said, David, you know, and here we're going to talk about David again, looked small and insignificant when going to meet Goliath, but looked larger when he had slain his foe. Oppression, organized as ours is, will appear invincible up to the very hour of its fall. I mean, it looks like we're up against giants. It looks like there's no way we can do this. Nobody. Look, some of you are my age, or maybe a few even older. Look, nobody thought the Berlin Wall was going to fall down. I didn't. I didn't expect that. I was shocked when finally Ronald Reagan said, we're going to bring down the Soviet Union, and they actually did it. I was shocked. I didn't expect it, but it happened. Boom, the Soviet Union was gone in a very short space of time. The people suddenly understood their own power. They knew they didn't have to stop for these guards because they, together, were powerful enough to overcome them. And they just opened the gates and they walked out. And that was it. It was over. Jesus told about the unjust judge and the persistent widow in Luke 18. He said, he spoke a parable to them that men always ought to pray and not lose heart, saying, there was in a certain city a judge who did not fear God nor regard man. Now there was a widow in that city, and she came to him, saying, get justice for me, for my adversary. And he would not for a while, but afterward he said within himself, though I do not fear God nor regard man, yet because this widow troubles me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. Then the Lord said, hear what the unjust judge said, and shall God not avenge his own elect who cry out day and night to him? Though he bears long with them, I tell you, he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith in the earth? This is one of the most convicting sentences in my Bible. Will he really find faith on the earth? Jesus asked that question. We abolitionists may not currently have the power of the magistrate, okay? We may not have the judicial power. We may not have the legislative power. We may be very much like the poor widow. In fact, we are. We're weak. I'll stand right up here and tell you I'm weak. I'm totally weak. Way weaker than most of you even realize. Politically and every other way. I'm weak. But what do we have? We have the truth. Okay? What's more powerful than God's truth? Anything in this universe? No. We have the Scripture and the moral law on our side. We have the Constitution on our side. No matter how small it may for a moment seem, we do have a voice. We have the ability to speak truth to power, as so many of us did in our testimony in Austin last year. We have the ability still as mature Christians and decent citizens to continue to call our executives, our judges, our representatives in the legislative branch, and especially our fellow Christians, to account. And most importantly, and this is my close, we still have the ability to cry out to God unceasingly for justice for the babies, amen, for justice for our unborn posterity. He will listen, and we will prevail in the end. Mark my words. One way or another, rest assured, though he tarry long. I'm looking forward to continuing this message tomorrow night from the same podium. I hope you all will join us. God bless you. Good night. Thank you, Daryl, for having me. I appreciate it.